How many times are we hearing we managed more in the last 4 months than we have in the last 4 years? As we enter the autumn, what we're seeing, and many of the features of mutual aid and local leaderships just getting on with it, are being replaced as we return to central diktats and strong oversight. GGI predicted this because what were seen as apparent gains were in fact a forced changing of one of the simple rules of work. So what leaders need to do is understand what happened as a result of the change in simple rules, other than that decisions got taken quickly. We must immediately start looking at the root cause of the issues that are now starting to surface, and then we can usefully move forward with a stronger knowledge of what simple rules of work we can change to create the environment in which decisions can be made in an agile way and the enormous agenda for public services can safely be delivered. We can do this, I think, by going back to London and Lisbon. Let's take London first. The government of Charles II maybe had 6 large-scale problems on their hands. They'd just had a civil war. The year before, there had been a great plague. There was significant religious dissent. There'd been a war with the Dutch, and revenues were collapsing. All this led to huge political tensions in the country. The king and authority and the institutions of state were effectively weak. The situation in Portugal in 1755 was very different. There had been years of struggles with the nobility and the Society of Jesus in Portugal, and the king was rather weak. And what the earthquake in 1755 gave the impetus to was for strong authority to be vested in the office of Prime Minister on behalf of the rather lazy king, and huge powers to be granted to someone who essentially was a liberaliser. The Prime Minister of the time was the Marquis of Pombal, a talented man, a squire's son, had been highly educated. So what the earthquake was able to change was that strong authority could be vested in the office of Prime Minister so that much could be done. Pombal was heavily influenced by the rise of commerce in England and the Georgian king's reforms that enabled trade to take place. Pombal set up what was the first public-private partnerships. He created new forms of commercial entity that enabled trade. There was no equivalent to this in Stuart London. There was no enlightened despotism to take strong decisions and to then put in place the institutions and the social glue that would promote wealth creation. It is easier to understand how the Stuart government in London in the 1660s failed to build the city as a new vibrant capital, and the Portuguese government under Pombal in the 1750s did. So what are the lessons for today as we find ourselves, as Mervyn King would say, swimming in a sea of coronaomics? It's important to see as well as what has changed, what hasn't. We still have the same structures and accountability arrangements as we had 6 months ago. We risk returning to what Professor King calls grudge compliance rather than enlightened leadership. At GGI, we're taking our thinking about governance and good governance one step further. Let's look at what governance should be bringing us in terms of meaningful outcomes. And there are 4. Governance systems should be delivering ethical culture, legitimacy, stronger control, and the creation of value. The difference between governance and good governance, we would say, is that good governance actually delivers the meaningful outcomes that Professor King describes. So let's take something like a decision. In a governance system, there'd be a process for making that decision. One would understand the problem, one would develop various options, we would consult on those, and then a decision would be made. But often such decisions are made and not considered legitimate. because the consultation process, for example, may be seen as just tokenistic, with a decision having already been taken. So the difference between a governance system and a system of good governance is that the decision would be taken as legitimate and the consultation would have been seen as authentic. But we need to think about the context in which good governance exists. So governance is used to describe a system for running organisations and systems, but it's also used to describe the maturity of a country. The World Bank has become very interested in governance in nation states and has set up a good governance index. They've described the features of a country that enjoys good governance. These features would include voice and accountability, political stability and the absence of violence. They would look at the rule of law, the effectiveness of government and the existence of regulation. Above all, good governance in a country would include the control of corruption. They would say governance consists in the traditions and institutions by which a country is effectively run. Authority was effectively exercised. This would include the process by which governments are selected, elected and replaced. The capacity of government to effectively formulate and implement policies and laws. Above all, the respect that citizens and the government have for the institutions that govern the economic and social interactions between them. In short, good governance needs to exist in a culture that understands and appreciates these concepts as valuable and important. So what was the simple rules change that happened in 1755 in Lisbon, but didn't happen in 1666 in London? And what can we learn from this? Both cities experienced cataclysmic disasters. Indeed, for Lisbon, it was the third such disaster in the prior 400 years. And both had the same aspirations to create something wonderful and new. The difference, I suggest, is what we need a dose of right now: inspired, compassionate leadership and the use of good governance as a platform for sustainable change. And that is the lesson from Lisbon.